It's August 9, Ukraine Media Center starts its operation. My name is Svetlana Shaprenko, and now we will be talking about the results of the work of Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office and National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine in the first half of 2024. Joining us in our studio are the heads of those organizations, Semen, Kryvonos, the director of National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, and Oleksandr, Klymenko, the head of the Specialized Prosecutor's Office. So let's watch a short introduction video to set the tone of our conversation today. First half of year 2024, NABU and SAPO continued to fight top corruption and uncover the multi-million schemes. One of them was with the participation of the ex-head of the Agrarian Committee of the Parliament, yet another scheme, the embezzlement of arrested petroleum in the amount of 967 million hryvnia. 7 individuals were served the relevant notes of suspicion, and yet another group was embezzled 160 million hryvnia. The damages made to Ukhrgazvodbudovanya, the schemes organized in Chernigiv customs. And obviously there were elements of graft. A judge of a regional court of Odessa was detained, receiving a bribe in amount of $1,500. One of the people's deputies was brought to liability for abuse of authority. The economic effect produced by the activities of NABU and SAPO amounted to more than 7 billion hryvnia. The fight goes on, neutralizing corruption. Well, the anti-corruption cases are being investigated in the silence, but their effects are always loud. So, Mr. Semen, can you please tell us about the key achievements of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine in the first half of this year? Good morning, dear journalists and dear spectators. So today we would like to present the report for the first half of the year 2024, and in those figures that you've just seen in the results of the work of the NABU and SAPO, we can clearly track an important trend. We continue reinforcing our efficiency. We continue increasing the number of disclosed cases. 166 suspects and 164 convictions. 3.7 billion hryvnia of economic effect. But it's not about the figures, it's about the quality. It's about the importance of those cases investigated by both of our agencies. It's about our most important and the most serious priorities. We focus on top corruption, on multi-million schemes that result in losses, as you may have seen on the screen, that result in losses of hundreds of million hryvnias. So we focus on top-level corruption, on corruption schemes headed by the so-called supervisors or top-level government officials. And those facts are evidenced by the figures. 7 top-level government officials were convicted recently. Category A officials, like people's deputies and officials of the same level, 11 heads of the government-controlled enterprises, 5 judges. And in those cases, I have to thank our colleagues from SAPO and High Anti-Corruption Court of Ukraine. Yet another important indicator of the increase of the number of cases investigated by us in coordination with our partners. We consider such coordination as an efficient tool, and we also focus our attention on the search of unsubstantiated assets. Also, we reinforce ourselves institutionally. Our organization has expanded in the end of year 2023. We made those statements before. We were requesting it. We were saying we need to grow. We were saying our resources are not sufficient, and 100 more positions of detectives and other people involved in investigations were added. We already started the contest to fill the vacancies, and we've added yet another stage of verification: online interview for faithfulness, during which you can see the way the people answer to the questions. I mean, those who want to become detectives in any department that is involved in investigation. So we try to ask inconvenient questions, so to say, during interviews, and everybody can see that procedure online and send their remarks online with regard to any candidate to this or that position. So our priorities for the year 24 and 25 are unchanged. The things that we are going to work in cooperation with our partners, with our international partners, with the colleagues, is the establishment of expert agency in the NABU. And it's very important because the risk of influence on the investigations of NABU and SAPO with the use of that instrument is extremely high. The risk of leak of information about extension of verification, inspection, examination, and distortion of its sense is a high risk, and I don't see any adequate explanation why such agency cannot be established for investigations in anti-corruption sector, for pre-court investigations that are performed by NABU and SAPO. Also, since the year 2019, NABU has legal grounds, but technically we don't use phone tapping. We are in active negotiations with the Security Service of Ukraine. We prepare the draft law in which we clearly stipulate with the stages for getting this technical possibility of tapping. When we, as an anti-corruption bureau, get relevant ruling from the court, would not need to ask the State Security Service of Ukraine to perform the tapping for us. That's in simple words. What risks does it bear? The risks are such that the Security Service of Ukraine see the phone numbers and the actual persons in relation of which we perform the investigations, and this is why we ask, since we investigate the cases of top-level government officials, we have to have such an autonomous access without anyone else seeing information about the subjects of our tapping. Yet another priority is independent audit that is supposed to happen this year. I personally, as a director, and all of the collective of the Bureau will assist to this audit. That will be the first audit in the history of our agency, and I think that it's an important initiative. It's contemplated by the memorandum between Ukraine and International Monetary Fund, and I think it's important to conduct this audit to identify the gaps in activities of Bureau, as well as the strong sides, and something that we could improve. For what I know, the international partners have already handed over the list of the candidates to the Cabinet of Ministers, and we are waiting for their decision. Me, as a director, I personally can't wait to see this important step in the history of NABU. And summarizing my short speech, once again, I would like to emphasize that during this half a year we've achieved, comparing it to the same periods of the last years, we've achieved the best results. This is why we are strong. We continue moving forward. We work hand in hand with Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, and we are ready to disclose top corruption just as the Ukrainian society demands from us. Thank you, Mr. Semen. So what is your evaluation of the first half of the year of operations of SAPO, and what are your priorities? Well, the director has already mentioned the numbers, so I'm not gonna repeat them, but in the first half a year of 24, this period has become the new stage in the history of development of SAPO. We started working as a separate legal entity, separated from the Office of Prosecutor General. We've implemented a number of administrative changes. We've updated or upgraded our collective. We continue putting together a professional team. We've initiated additional filling of prosecutors' vacancies. We've expanded our staff because it increased proportionally with the staff of NABU. Basically, their expansion of organization enabled us to expand our staff too. This is why those legislative changes, they demonstrate their results. As the director said, our efficiency keeps growing. This is the most successful half a year within the history of NABU and SAPO, and in fact, it corresponds with the former annual indicators, and we're not going to stop there. We are going to continue. This dynamics of increase of efficiency is quite reasonable because we increase the number of those who will investigate the cases and support the prosecutor's office during the investigations. Also, on top of indictments, we put together for civil cases for enforcement of unreasonable or unsubstantiated assets. We continue adding more and more materials for forwarding more cases to the courts. That's quite an efficient tool, and if we compare it, for example, the case with embezzlement in the amount of 5, 6, 7 million hryvnia can be heard in the court for like 5, 6, or 7 years, even longer. And the cases for confiscation of unsubstantiated assets can be viewed by the court within 2 or 3 months, and then we get good results. Also, it's worth mentioning that we don't only forward the cases to the court, but we also have certain results in the courts. 35 convictions within the first 6 months of the year 24, ruled by the High Anti-Corruption Court of Ukraine. And talking about our priorities, our top priority is cooperation with our international partners, coordination of our work with law enforcement agencies of other countries, because I've already mentioned that we have a huge problem with returning to Ukraine of the people who are hiding in other countries from the law enforcement agencies of Ukraine. That's quite an important issue. The number of such people keeps growing, and taking into account their political importance for the country and the amount of resources that those people possess, they can hide from law enforcement agencies for pretty long until the statute of limitation for their cases expires. And we set up communication with certain countries. We keep engaging the Office of Prosecutor General in order to explain the importance of implementation of those measures, the fact that Ukraine takes actions to rectify this situation with those imprisoned. This also important for us is to improve the Institute of Agreements to make the pre-court investigation of top-level corruption cases more smooth in relation to organizers of criminal schemes. The draft law has already passed the first reading. We don't quite agree with construing of certain of its provisions. This is why we've suggested the Law Enforcement Committee to review our vision of this law, how to make it the most efficient for the anti-corruption bodies of Ukraine. We forwarded the joint letter that describes the best options that in our opinion may ensure the efficient development of our institutions. Well, I think that it's enough basically to cancel the reasons for closing of investigation due to expiration of pre-court investigation terms and handing over the materials to the prosecutor's office. Is quite a simple draft law that would solve a lot of criminal proceedings where the billions of hryvnias of losses and damage were identified. So basically that's it in short. Thank you, Mr. Oleksandr. The results are quite convincing, but we understand that the journalists have gathered here to ask uncomfortable questions. So let me be the first one. So what is the situation with information leaks? What is the story about them? And when are we going to hear the names? Well, I was ready to this question, and I can answer this question in part. It's important for Ukrainian society to know this information. Again, the beneficiary of all of our investigations and the main controller of our activities is the Ukrainian society. If the Ukrainian society has questions, that's a serious reason for us as an anti-corruption bureau to ponder over those questions. That's a huge challenge for me as the director of bureau. The mistakes were made in the beginning of that investigation. I recognize them as the director. I keep working on improvement of the processes, but talking directly about the investigation itself within the limits of my competence. Yesterday, I've approved the results of the service investigation that was related to the events that unfolded after the investigation of the facts of leak. The investigation of the case of pressure over the whistleblowers. That was one. So my approval was one of the stages in that investigation, answering the question, in those parts that I can disclose. The Department of Internal Control identified certain violations of ethics code of the NABU employees, as well as a violation of the law on the public service. A person in relation of which the investigation was going on provided the objections, and the results of that investigation were approved by me, and now they will be considered by the disciplinary commission. The disciplinary commission is made up of 5 persons, including 3 employees of National Anti-Corruption Bureau, plus 2 representatives of the Council of Public Control of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. They are supposed now to verify those results and to identify whether there was a fact of violation or not, and provide relevant recommendations on implementation of sanctions with regard to those persons. So that's the responsibility of the disciplinary commission. Since the materials are handed over to them, they will shortly proceed to studying of the materials, and they will further on hold meetings as a collegial body to solve those issues that I've mentioned. Also, during the period of study of this case, of this disciplinary proceeding, I've appointed a representative of the Public Control Council, Viktor Prudkovsky, as the head of the committee. During their meeting, they will elect the secretary and come up with the opinion of the disciplinary committee. And talking about the pre-court investigation and some procedure moments, Mr. Oleksandr may add more detail about that. So we're moving forward, and I hope we are about to publish, as I've mentioned, we are about to publish the results of the disciplinary committee meeting and of the pre-court investigation. If you have any additional questions, I'm open to answering them. Mr. Oleksandr, do you have anything to add in this regard? Well, the pre-court investigation is still underway. We're still not ready to talk about any rulings or details, but there is a number of investigative actions that are planned. They are still ongoing, and disclosure of this information may harm the process. There are additional complications added by the fact that the suspects were aware of the investigation, but it's still ongoing. There's a number of the investigative actions. A lot of people are working on it, and a huge amount of information is supposed to be analyzed by them to come up with certain opinion and to continue their investigation. And I think that we will definitely inform the public as soon as we may come up with any opinion, final opinion. I think we have time for the questions from the floor, just a couple of minutes. Channel 5, Hanna Rebelka, I'm having a question to Mr. Kryvonos and Mr. Klymenko. So we've heard from the head of Anti-Corruption Committee of the Parliament that before the 15th of August, we expect to hear the results of that investigation from NABU and SAPO. Do I understand it correctly that we're not going to see any results before the 15th of August? And can you just add more details? You said about the pressure over the whistleblower, not about the results, right? You've mentioned this investigation. Ms. Anastasia said it, yes, about the 15th of August, but we have the procedures strictly regulated by certain acts. So the investigation about the pressure over the whistleblowers and other issues started in that investigation. They were finalized 2 weeks ago. Then there was time to get familiarized with the materials of the internal investigation, and then the first deputy head of NABU, he had a right to provide his objections. The objections were provided by him yesterday. He had that regulated period of 5 working days to get familiarized with the materials of internal investigation, and he did so. Me, after getting familiarized with his objections, I've added them to the materials of internal investigation and I've approved them. Then the materials are handed over to the consideration of disciplinary commission. That is an internal body that includes the members of the Public Control Council. Then the disciplinary commission studies the materials, they take the decision, and they recommend me as the director to come up with a resolution or to implement a certain type of disciplinary enforcement. And whether it's going to happen on 15th or 16th of August, well, I cannot tell you for sure. We're moving ahead within the terms stipulated by the relevant regulations. So was there a leak? When will the public know whether there was a leak? Well, this internal investigation has nothing to do with the leak. With relation to the leak, there is another investigation ongoing, and upon its results, we will communicate them to the public. That's an internal investigation. Once again, let me emphasize, that was not in relation to the leak. It was related to the events that happened after one of the whistleblower mentioned about possible leak of information. Talking about Solsky case, NABU is investigating that case for 5 years, and the detectives are going to investigate 500 veterans. So what is the plan for NABU to interrogate such a number of veterans, given the fact that some of them are still in the front lines, and how many cases approximately can be investigated in this relation? The detective and the prosecutor will identify the persons who can be interrogated within the framework of this criminal proceeding. There is the plan for pre-court investigation, and it will be achieved with the consideration of the circumstances that you've mentioned. There is sufficient amount of evidences for indictment, I think. And my question is, where did you get this information about the fact that NABU is going to interrogate 500 veterans? Are there any plans written there? Thank you. Another question, please. Georgi Shvev, Radio Freedom. Can you please tell us, talking about those cases that are being investigated by National Anti-Corruption Bureau and Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, the head of Parliamentary Committee Klymenko and Deputy Head of Prosecutors General Dmitry Verbitsky, what is the stage of those investigations? One case was opened in March, another one was opened just recently. So what are the results? When the indictments are going to be served? That's the question to Mr. Oleksandr. Is there the case for civil confiscation of unsubstantiated assets? Will unlawful enrichment is a new type of crime? In both cases, no indictments were served. Pre-court investigation is still ongoing. We don't consider the option of the civil enforcement because, according to the legislation, the amount in question exceeds the civil enforcement procedures, and if we do it under this civil enforcement procedure, we will kind of save this person from liability. So in those two cases, the pre-court investigation is still ongoing, and I don't see any artificial extension or any other problems in those two investigations, and we are about to see the results shortly, I hope. Another question. Oksana Grud, Interfax Ukraine. My question is about corruption in the war in the sector of reconstruction and recovery. Talking about the bids, I mean those two cases that were heard lately with regard to the construction of military cemetery and Ahmadid hospital. So will anti-corruption agencies get involved in any investigations? Because there was a scandal, it was pretty loud, and basically how can we in future make sure that such things don't happen, so we don't look not so good in the eyes of the rest of the world? I mean the schemes, the logic of prevention of such cases. Thank you. We are currently studying those two cases. We analyze and verify the information with regard to Ahmadid. We are currently investigating the subjects that are within jurisdiction of NABU, because there was the use of money from the charity funds. But again, so far we don't investigate anything officially. We only study the affiliation of the persons or the subjects who could be within NABU jurisdiction. For what I know, the bid was cancelled, and talking about the cemetery, the bid was reannounced. We're studying this case. If there will be grounds for adding any information to the pre-court investigation register, we will immediately proceed with this case and bring the guilty ones to liability. We can keep track of this case from the very beginning. In general, what do you mean? How to prevent cases like this? Well, first of all, we need the transparent procedures for selection of the contractors, clear criteria for admission, clear eligibility criteria for contractors in order to prevent the companies without relevant experience, relevant materials and machinery who could win bids like this. But in that particular case, the money was coming from charity. It was not about the public procurement and government money, but still, what's most important is the public control of the side of the journalists. That's the most efficient method to prevent any embezzlement. So when do we intervene? When the agreements are already entered into, when there is the procedure that's already started, when information is leaked about the funds being stolen, and this is when we start working. It can happen in the beginning of this scheme, but again, it's our investigation, because there are certain investigative actions that are not being made public. But the best option is to prevent situations like this during the war, when the country is waging a war, when people were donating money to rebuild the Akhmadit, or when it was another sensitive issue, with construction of memorial. So it was public control that prevented this case from unfolding. Basically, the publicity was what stopped any negative developments in this area. We have another question for a last question. Thank you. I'm the correspondent of Latvian Radio. I have a question to Mr. Kryvonos. In your opinion, what is the situation with the top corruption in Ukraine, and do you have everything necessary to disclose the cases of top corruption in Ukraine? Well, the situation with the top corruption, well, I can state that Ukraine, talking about the index of corruption perception, about the growth of Ukraine in this rating among other countries, so there we're coming close to the countries of European Union, countries of the Balkan Peninsula. We've done a lot as a country to counter corruption. And the fact of our work is the evidence of the fact that the corruption exists, but the issue is, what is the reaction of the government agencies? Are we ready to bring those guilty to liability? Are we ready to disclose the cases of top-level corruption? And I can say, yes, we are ready to this. The judges of the Courts of Appeal, people's deputies, deputy ministers, who were basically caught in hot steps, well, those are all evidences of the fact that, yes, corruption does exist. There are scandals. You've heard those questions with the public procurement, with embezzlement. But the question is, what does the state do in order to prevent this? And what are we as an anti-corruption agency are supposed to do to investigate such crimes, to bring the guilty ones to liability, and to prevent any such cases in future? And this is something that's gonna play a huge role for decrease of corruption in general. Another short question, we still have time for it. I just wanted to ask that question, Mr. Kryvonos. You've mentioned that the internal investigation was finalized. So do I understand it correct that there was a pressure over the employees of NABU, and have you identified the fact of violation of allegiance? So what is the deadline for the disciplinary commission to come up with their resolution. The sources say that Uhlava may be... Can you introduce yourself? Oleg Sukhov. Mr. Oleg, I don't have such sources of information as you have. I don't know when and who will be fired from NABU for sure. I know that I am strictly guided by our internal regulations and the law of Ukraine. The disciplinary commission is not restricted in terms of time with regard to their investigation, but as long to the extent that I'm familiar with the work of the disciplinary commission, I can forecast that they will review the materials within 2 to 3 weeks and come up with relevant resolution. That's my expectation, basically. It all depends on the number of people they would want to interrogate, on those people whom they would like to invite for announcement of their resolution. So they have the whole range of rights as a disciplinary commission to implement some additional things, to ask additional questions. Talking about the materials of internal investigation, I intentionally avoid as an official the direct statements, because those materials are the materials of internal investigation. They are for service use, and this is why I avoid any surnames and the description of specific violations. I've already taken measures to remove the secrecy level to provide the access for the disciplinary committee or commission to disclose some information, to make at least part of it public. So now there are identified facts of violation of the Code of Ethics, violation of internal regulations of NABU, and violation of the law of Ukraine on public service. Whether it was a pressure or not, that's the competency of disciplinary committee. I cannot, convict anybody beforehand. Yes, there were violations identified. We'll remove the secrecy level, and the disciplinary commission will, I will suggest them, and they will come up with their resolution themselves to review the materials publicly, so we can basically talk substantially. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Semen. Mr. Oleksandr, let me remind you, we were talking to the heads of NABU and SAPO, Semen, Kryvonos, and Oleksandr Klymenko, and we will continue at 1300. We will be talking to the head of Zaporizhzhia Military Administration, Ivan Fedorov. Stay tuned.